So this week there's been a lot of discussion around Michael Heseltine's report, No Stone Unturned. I'm joined by Jane Reoch, who is the Investment Director at the Cass Entrepreneurship Fund, to hear her thoughts about the report. So Jane, first of all, tell us a little bit about the Cass Entrepreneurship Fund.
So the Cass Entrepreneurship Fund is a £10 million venture capital fund based here at Cass, and it's specifically for backing Cass entrepreneurs, so alumni or students who have set up their own businesses, and we look at funding the most promising of those companies to help them scale and to help them achieve their growth ambitions.
And how many companies are you supporting at the moment?
We've got 6 investments in the current portfolio, and we're in discussions with a number of other entrepreneurs about backing their companies.
So moving on to this Hazeltine report, what is it that it actually says?
So there are 3 main groups of recommendations in the Hazeltine report. These are around localisation, further SME support, and inward investment, so foreign direct investment into the UK.
And looking at the SME area, which is obviously what you look at, what is it that he's recommended there?
Well, the report highlighted a number of statistics around the SME sector, and in fact some of these were quite concerning. Many of the SMEs in the UK, like the majority of them, are displaying no growth, low growth, or are in fact declining. And I think this is quite worrying when that's the group that the government is backing to take the UK out of economic stagnation.
So is the report recommending backing more SMEs?
In principle, yes. It's about backing, giving more support and more funding to the SME community. I guess one of the areas we wasn't highlighted was which of those SMEs. So looking at potentially companies which have displayed some growth dynamics, and really pushing towards those kind of more elite SMEs in the market, as they're the ones who could potentially provide more jobs and more sustained jobs going forward, because they'll be backed by founders and managers who have proved that they can already create value in that segment of the market. There are some SME policies already in place, in fact some which benefit the companies that the fund has backed. So we have things like R&D tax credits, which provide incentives for businesses who are specifically focused on creating real innovation in their companies. The government recognises that requires funding and should be encouraged, and offers some actual cash return, tax breaks for those businesses, of which some of our businesses take advantage of.
So does the report recommend more backing for SMEs?
In summary, yes, it's one of the key outputs of the report. It doesn't necessarily distinguish between the types of businesses that should be supported with that funding. So not necessarily just about making funding widely available, but making sure that it's allocated where it's potentially most use and most valuable for that sector. So potentially maybe finding the elite group of SMEs who have proven growth through the last few years, and who you can potentially provide more jobs and more sustained jobs in that sector. There are some SME policies that the report commented on already in place. Things like R&D tax credits, actually our companies benefit from already, so they provide actual cash returns to companies who have invested into R&D, into innovation in their businesses, and the government already recognises that that's an area that should be incentivised.
So what does the report say about localism?
Well, the report highlights a number of disparities across the regions in terms of economic growth. So growth is strongest in London and the South East. Scotland is actually holding up quite well. The North and the Midlands is struggling a little bit more. And this is a well-known issue across the UK. It's about where the government can potentially help foster further economic growth in those regions. And in fact, one of the key recommendations is about creating more local support, more local funding for businesses than necessarily just central government support and funding. historically, there have been regional development agencies, although the money that was deployed through those agencies wasn't necessarily used with the greatest impact, and in fact the level of returns was very low from those. In fact, the agencies were noted to have lost quite a lot of money that was meant to be invested rather than given away in terms of grants. That was all reorganised a few years ago, and they replaced with something called local enterprise partnerships, LEPs. These are in place and they're providing support rather than necessarily funding, and are currently supplemented with regional growth funds. So the report is effectively recommending more money being pushed down through those LEPs and indeed the RGFs as well.
So is it almost like a return to what was and what's been changed?
This is one of the criticisms of the report, is it just a return to a policy that was potentially not impactful in its implementation.
And what about inward investment?
So this is quite common sense policy of encouraging more companies to set up in the UK. There was also a few recommendations about clarification on the London airports and clarification on immigration policy to help businesses which are outside the UK to see it as an attractive place to set up. And that just creates more UK jobs.
And generally, how would you say the report has been received?
I think there have been criticisms of individual recommendations, but the widest criticism has in fact been that it won't be implemented at all, that it will just be kicked into the long grass by government. I think there is support around a lot of the SME initiatives, which is good. I think perhaps less so around the localisation of funding, and it's politically, I think that's known to be not necessarily supported by the current Chancellor, and so you then have that would be quite common, the political implications of the strategy as well.
Jane, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you, Mary.